Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth meeting of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council 9, which I formally declare to be open. Today, we will be hearing from the three working group co-chairs on their progress. Before we begin, I would just like to ask that everyone on Teams turn off their video and microphone except when you are speaking. Questions or comments on the presentations from CSRIC members are encouraged and welcomed. If a member has a question or comment, those at the FCC should turn their tent card sideways, and those on Teams should use the hand-raising function. And with that, I turn the meeting over to Billy Bob Brown, CSRIC 9 co-chair. Thanks.
All right, good afternoon, and it is great to see CSRIC members here in person and to see all those who've joined us on Teams. The work that you all are doing is critically important as the nation has immense challenges that are in front of us, certainly as we've been watching some of the happenings in cyberspace over the last 4 or 5 months, the work that you all are doing and how it will contribute to the FCC's ability to help enable a better environment that allows for all providers to have what I would at least term a secure by design and a secure by default way of thinking will allow for those technologies to perform those mission critical functions. All right, I'd like to start by doing a roll call, and I'll work through the roll call list. If I don't call your names, it's because we have gone through, found you on Teams, and identified you as being present. Otherwise, if you are here representing someone on Teams, that you want to make sure that you're identifying who the member is, please say so as we go through the roll call. All right, starting with Brandon Adley.
Present.
Mike Barnes.
Present.
Thank you. Richard Barron.
Present.
Alexandra Blaskin.
This is David Grossman with CTA as the alternate.
Thank you. Wade Buckner.
Present.
Douglas Campbell. Luis Eduardo. Paul Eisler. Bob Everson. Michael Gerber. Natnell Habinson. Puneet Jain. Ankur Kapoor.
Present.
Thank you. George Kellerman. Jason Livingood. Martin McGrath. Leah Misseldine.
Present.
Thank you. Douglas Montgomery. Brian Murray.
Present.
Thank you. Todd Pipe. Sean Scott. Brian Tegmeyer.
Present.
Thank you.
Present. Sorry.
That was Sean. Okay. Thank you, Sean. Rick and Thacker. Steve Watkins.
He's retired.
George Woodward.
Present.
Are there any representatives on teams who I didn't call?
Yes, hi, this is Brian Daly. I don't believe my name was called.
Hi, this is Narottam Saxena from USL.
Thank you.
Tim Schramm.
You didn't mean whose name wasn't called. You meant
No, that they weren't.
they've joined it in
They've
the
joined
past
since I
couple of
started,
minutes,
yeah.
right?
Leek Regan.
You guys.
I'm not sure if we can turn the volume up. Okay, I see two hand raised.
Yeah, Jason Hug.
Jason?
I just spoke, Mike Regan. I'll lower my hand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Rob Aldifer here as well.
All right, thank you. And I see one last raised hand.
Is that Jason? All right, it's not, he already told you he's here, right? All right, so,
Okay. All right, let's move into working group presentations. We'll start with Working Group 1, Harnessing Artificial Intelligence, Machine Learning to Ensure Security, Reliability, and Integrity of the Nation's Communications Networks.
here's run a show if it helps, just so you know, yeah.
Work Group 1, Vijay, Jason?
Yes. Hi. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. So good afternoon, all. On behalf of my co-chair, Jason, I'd like to thank the CSRIC Council and the working group members and all those who are attending for an opportunity to present an update to Working Group 1, an update for Working Group 1. Could you go to the next slide, please? So the first couple slides, slides 2 and 3, provide a quick background on the complexity that faced us as we started the work for Report 1. During the December 2024 meeting, we appraised the Council of the challenges inherent in the work and how we proposed to make progress. I'll come back to this in a minute. So if you go to next slide, which just gives you a quick overview of how we at least wanted to address this as a first cut. And then the next two slides list the working group members and the alternates. For completeness, this slide lists the 3 deliverables that Working Group 1 is to produce. The first deliverable is on the report on the threats posed by AI/ML to the security, reliability, and integrity of networks, and recommendations on how to overcome these. This report was originally due March 25th, today, 2025. But as I will talk about in a bit, we got an extension to deliver the report on June 2025. The second deliverable is recommended best practices for ethical use of AI. And the third deliverable is public safety networks 911. So those are the 3 deliverables that we have in front of us. Next slide, please. If the slides are being shared, I cannot see those slides right now, but maybe others can. Yeah. Great, I can see the slides now. Could we go to slide 7, please? Great. All right. So, as mentioned before, during the December 2024 meeting, we appraised the council of the challenges inherent in the work and our proposal to make progress by dividing the working group in 13 technical areas that you can see on the screen. As the work and deliberations progressed between December 2024 and end of January 2025, we realized that we needed to further reduce the complexity in order to produce a report that ensures the key insights and recommendations are clearly articulated. To that effect, on January 29, 2025, Jason and I made a formal request to the DFO to extend the delivery date of Report 1. The delivery date was extended to June 2025, and we thank the DFO and the Council in honoring the request and granting us an extension. So what we have now done is we have further consolidated these 13 technical areas that you see, such that we can focus on the technical areas that deal with the telecommunication networks, as represented by 5G in green and the 6G networks. Some aspects of the technical areas that you see that have been crossed out, like those in yellow, were incorporated into 5G networks. For example, the UE handset, the business support system, and the contact center operations made it to other parts of the 5G technical areas that you can see in green. Others in yellow, like audio and speech, will find their way to the second report that the working group will produce. And of course, the public safety networks has a deliverable of its own. So we haven't abandoned anything. We've realigned and tried to focus on areas that relate directly to telecommunication networks. IoT was an interesting aspect that we considered as a group, and we decided that for IoT, our recommendation would be for the FCC to consider including IoT in a future CSRIC. I think it is important from, we think it's important from many angles. Healthcare uses IoT, SCADA systems use IoT. So I think a larger treatment in a future CSRIC might be warranted. So basically, as you see on this slide, the working group decided to focus on 5G networks, proper for Report 1. Next slide, please. So our working group calendar as what you see on the slide. Work on reports 1 and 2 is proceeding simultaneously, and later in the summer, we will start to work on report 3 as we finish report 2. Next slide, please. So what's the current status of report 1? Currently, the various subgroups in the working group that were working on the technical areas have all handed in their work to the editor team, who is consolidating the contents into a first draft of the report. This draft will be in the hands of the working group on March 21, which is end of this week. We have budgeted 6 weeks from March 24 to April 30 for multiple working group iterations through the report. Each iteration will build on comments received from the working group, and we save 2 weeks, May 1st to May 13th, for the working group to provide final comments to the editor team. We expect to have a working group approved report by May 21st and hand the report to the DFO on May 23rd. Through all of this, the editing team has played a central role in managing the cycle of revisions, and I would like to acknowledge the contributions of the editors, Lauren Kravitz, Timothy May, and Peter Santana. Next slide, please. So that's the status of report 1. Now to report 2. The second report's focus is on recommended best practices for FCC and the industry on the ethical and practical use of AI/ML. Deliberations have started in the working group, and we have organized 5 SME talks on responsible AI to understand how the industry is approaching this. We would like to thank Sam Kaplan from Palo Alto Networks, Lei Yu from Expression.ai, Sean Kennedy from Nokia Bell Labs, and Annie Gavorkian and Jennifer Oberhausen from Microsoft for sharing their insights as subject matter experts. So here we have kept aside 2 weeks for the working group deliberations on how to effectively scope the boundaries of ethical and practical use of AI ML as required by the deliverable. Scoping is an important part, and the working group will be discussing whether it wants to constrain the scope to telecommunications network only, or whether applications of the telecommunication network are also to be considered. For example, there are key ethical implications if an AI agent in the future makes a 911 call on behalf of its subscriber. To name a couple of these ethical implications, the AI could misrepresent data and make unnecessary or incorrect emergency call, potentially diverting resources from real emergencies. Or the AI, or one has to consider who has the liability and accountability when the AI misrepresents an emergency or fails to call when needed. In such cases, it is unclear who would be legally or ethically responsible. Is it the user, the subscriber, the AI developer, or the device manufacturer? So the working group is kind of working through these tensions, and if the council has any guidance for the working group on scoping, we would greatly appreciate the opportunity to engage in dialogue with the appropriate council members so we can ensure alignment and drive consensus in the working group. So please, if any of the council members have any feedback, please get in touch with Jason and myself, and we would love to have a dialogue with you to see what we can do for scoping. Next slide, please. Continuing with report 2, we plan to, once we have scoped the work, we plan to spend 2 months, April and May, by having sub-teams in the working group produce content on their specific areas of interest, followed by 2 months to consolidate, conduct cycles of reviews, and produce a final draft on report 2. We expect to hand the draft to the DFO on August 2025 as per schedule. And as we hand off the report to the DFO, we also start to simultaneously work on report 3. Time in shaping up the report 1 and starting work on report 2. We do look forward to submitting report 1 in June. Thank you all for your time, and Jason is here as well, so we are happy to take any questions you might have.
Are there any questions from any of the members? Brandon.
Yes, Brandon Abley from NINA. I noticed you kind of flew past it, but I had to notice that you had the use case where an AI agent makes a 911 call on behalf of a user. Can you expound on that?
Yes. So obviously this is not happening now, but you could imagine with all kinds of sensors on these telephones and the tie-in between what's happening from the sensor's perspective and what permissions a user might have given an AI agent that is running locally on the telephone, such that the AI agent decides that a 911 call can be made. The piece parts of the technologies are already here, right? We have sensors that run on these phones. We have AI agents that run on these phones. It's a matter of putting these piece parts together to see what kind of services we can, deploy and develop. And if these services do become available in the future, what impact does it has on not only the telephone network, but expectations when these services do not perform as expected? Who is going to be held responsible?
Okay, thank you. And I have to check myself with the FCC. We can have outside SMEs contribute to a working group, correct? Okay. I would very much like to assist with this if I can in my role at NINA. This is something that we're dealing with in our standards developments and just in our general inquiry and policies. So I'd be very happy to come in and talk if I can with the work group.
Yes, absolutely. Jason and I can reach out to you. We also have a third deliverable, as you know, that's focused on 911, but aspects of what to discuss there versus what to discuss here in the second report from an ethical perspective, we would love to have that conversation with you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll reach out.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much to Working Group 1. You all are doing a tremendous job. Working Group 2, ensuring consumer access to 911 on all available networks as technology evolves. Working Group chairs.
Yes, Brandon Abley from NENA, the 911 Association, speaking for the work group. We have a relatively brief report this week. Most of our contributions are in text, so I wish that our draft report had a lot of illustrations to make for a more compelling presentation, but unfortunately, it doesn't. So we have two reports due. The first report is our recommendations and best practices for connecting stalled 911 calls through alternative network options, which is due in June. This follows a similar timeline as Work Group 1. We have to have the work done in May so that it can be reviewed well before the CSRIC meeting for approval at our meeting in June. I'll go into some detail on what we're looking at in that first report, but you can see some bullet points here reflecting the Commission's mandate in terms of what we have to report on. We have our second report, which is due in March of next year, our recommendations for preventing adverse impacts on PSAPs and NG911 from 911 calls made through alternative network options. This may dovetail into what we had just spoken about with the CSRIC, perhaps with an agent making a 911 call on behalf of somebody. Something to pay attention to and something we should monitor as a full CSRIC. Next slide, please. We have our full list of members here. I'm happy to say that the expertise on Working Group 2 is incredible. Something we discussed with the Working Group chairs calls is whether we had sufficient expertise to do our work. And I feel myself and my co-chair, Mr. Stephen Hayes, feel fully confident that the Commission has selected the right people to do this work. Our calls are just so engaging and eventful, and I wish we had more than one per week, frankly. And we have our alternates listed here as well. So our status on deliverable 1, which we would be working on right now. Our regular calls are scheduled during this time block, so we canceled this week's meeting because we'd have our members at the CSRIC, but our work is progressing on the document. We're currently on our 13th revision of our draft right now. We have weekly meetings, as I mentioned. We aren't having one this week. The structure of the document is stable and most of the early sections are done, so we do have a good skeleton of a report. We know where we're going. We're focusing on the analysis section of the report, which is where most of the content is going to come from. Importantly, the responsibilities have been allocated and they're being integrated into the document. So the way we're approaching this comes from our history and standards development, where we sort of structured the document the same way we would structure a standard. We had issue champions for each of the issues we identified, and we assigned them. And then it's my job to bully people every week to get their contributions in so that we can make progress on the document. Each of the new alternative access networks, including satellites, private networks, Wi-Fi, and Sidelink, present unique challenges and configurations with respect to network selection, and these conversations have been very interesting. One of them, for example, is with the responsibilities that a private mobile network might have to deliver a 911 call. Consulted with members of the work group talked to attorneys on either side of the issue, and it's just a really interesting detail. With respect to Wi-Fi, the last CSRIC addressed this topic, so we will summarize and touch on some of those points and update them, but we aren't putting a lot of effort into, for example, a mobile phone accessing a Wi-Fi network because we did that work in the previous CSRIC. And we are on track to meet our June timeframe to have our final report due in May. Again, Mr. Hayes and I will make sure of it, and any of the work group members that might be participating remotely on this call have or will hear from me today to get their work done. Next slide, please. One of the things we are doing is having presentations from experts. In many cases, we have a member that is part of a company that's able to make the presentation, but they have to pull in outside SMEs and able to cover the issue in detail. We have a summary here of the ones we've already had. I believe we were supposed to have one today, unfortunately, so we have to reschedule that. We schedule these presentations, and we're not mindful of the meeting of the full CSRIC. But one thing I'll touch on is that in terms of alternative access methods, something we've put a lot of attention to is access via satellites by mobile devices, which the Commission has recently done work on, and which is sort of the state of the technology now, and solutions are emerging and advancing in terms of accessing 911 through satellite on a mobile device. I would welcome any input from the full CSRIC if there are other things we should be paying attention to. But I will give caution that the bulk of our really valuable insights at this point have been focused on those satellite technologies and how they can assist accessing 911 when the primary network is not available. Next slide. And with that, I close my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or receive suggestions at this point.
Thank you. Let me turn to the members of CSRIC to see if there are any questions, either in the room or on Teams. Seeing no questions, I want to say thank you to the working group for the tremendous efforts that you're doing. And if I could make a side note, I'm not sure how you all worked out the arrangements on who would do what, but how you got picked to be the enforcer, I'm not sure that's how that worked out, but I'm glad you're doing that because you're super organized.
Thank you, sir.
All right, turning to working group 3, preparing for 6G security and reliability. I'll turn it over to the working group chairs.
Thank you. Hi, this is Brian Daly. On behalf of George Woodward and myself, we'd like to go ahead and give the presentation on Working Group 3, which is, as mentioned, preparing for 6G security and reliability. If we go to the next slide, please. So just a quick refresh. I won't go through this in detail, but what our charter and tasks are, it's basically to look at the security and reliability risks that are unique to the emerging 6G networks and services. And ultimately, what we want to do is have a report on potential security and reliability risks in 6G, and also recommendations for mitigation, and that's targeted for the end of this year. And as we all know, 6G is expected to result in orders of magnitude improvements in network speed and latency, and with that comes capabilities that cause distinctions between the physical and cyber worlds to fade, and around that we have potential security and reliability risks that we need to address and mitigate. Next slide, please. So again, we have a very very good working group. A lot of discussions happened during our working group meeting. Glad to see we have good attendance, from our members at working groups, and a lot of participation and a lot of contributions. So I'm not going to go through each one in detail, but just want to offer the thanks to each of the working group members and their respective companies that provide support to the working group, and of course to George and myself and Jeff for the liaison to the FCC. We do also have a number of alternates that do participate and contribute to the discussion. And if we go to the next slide, please. So we've been meeting biweekly on virtual meetings. We've had several subject matter experts that have invited to give presentations to the working group on a number of topics. One is 6G threat analysis to give us an understanding on how we go through a proper threat analysis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. But also 6G sensing and security, a security-first approach to 6G, and then finally post-quantum cryptography and how it will apply both to the existing 5G as well as the emerging 6G mobile networks. And of course, our deliverable is in progress, and we're making headway on that as well. Next slide, please. So just a refresh on the 6G timelines, use cases, architectures, and features. Everything really started off with the ITUR's vision for IMT 2030. And those vision statements have defined the framework. The requirements and evaluation criteria are under development and will be available early next year. That will be followed by standardization efforts that will take place in 3GPP and potentially elsewhere, followed by the specifications being evaluated within the ITU for ultimately approval as IMT 2030 standards. And if we look at the capabilities of IMT 2030, security and resilience, reliability are front and center, as you see on the wheel. We also have latency, user experience data rates, and peak data rates also as some of the main areas. When we look at the usage scenarios, we are looking both at extensions that we have from 5G or IMT 2020, as well as new capabilities that are going to be introduced, including ubiquitous connectivity, AI and communication, and integrated sensing and communication. Next slide, please. We have bad echo there. So looking at the 6G timelines, use cases, and I think we have open mic that's causing echo from Tim. There we go. So looking at the 6G timelines, use cases, architectures, and features, there is a study phase that has begun in 3GPP, in particular in SA1, which is the requirements group. They did the approval of that study phase and have begun actual technical studies of the 6G radio interface as well as the 6G core network architecture that's going to begin in earnest in June of this year. Release 20 will have the study items for 6G, and the timeline is shown on this slide in the bottom right. You can see that the study has begun, and that will continue through 2026 timelines, and ultimately the specifications coming out in the late 26 to 27 timeline. Release 21 is going to be the official start of the normative 6G work in 3GPP, and that will have the first formal 6G specifications, and those will be the ones that will be evaluated against the IMT 2030 requirements. And it's expected that the timeline for Release 21 is going to be finalized no later than June of 2026, and the actual completion of it will be no later than March of 2029 timeframe. Next slide, please. So recently, there was a 6G workshop that was held by 3GPP, and this, was held in Korea about a week ago, and this was the opportunity for 3GPP participants to present the vision and priorities as we move into 6G. There were a lot of people that attended this. See, over 1,600 were registered. 748 actually attended or registered for in-person attendees. There are 219 input contributions coming from a variety of sources, including mobile network operators, vendors, academia, and their discussions covered the entire system, the radio, the core network, protocols, and more. From that, I just wanted to highlight the 6G security and resilience goals that were highlighted. That included increased security, integrity, and privacy as required from day one. So building security into the system from day one is one of the important principles that came out of the workshop. And that would include incorporating zero trust principles as well as post-quantum security measures. Also designing networks that are robust and can withstand various events, including operational errors, heavy traffic, as well as disasters. So I think these security and resilience goals are right in line for what we're being tasked with to look at. And as 3GPP progresses in the development of 6G standards, certainly those security and resilience goals will be front and center. Next slide, please. So I did mention one of the presentations we had was to look at threat modeling. And specifically, we wanted to understand, can threat modeling be used to identify threats to 6G? Well, what is threat modeling? It is a structured representation of information impacting application security. And it views the application and its environment through a security lens. We want to understand from a security perspective, what does that system and its application and the environment that system provides, what threats could potentially exist? The process for threat modeling includes capturing, organizing, and analyzing security-related information, as well as enabling an informed decision-making about application security risks. And ultimately, what you want to do is to produce a threat model. Get an understanding of what the threats are to that system, to those applications, and to that environment that you're analyzing. And you want to generate a prioritized list of security improvements for the concept, requirements, design, or implementation. And the need for mitigations can be identified in one or two ways. And probably the way you don't want to do it is after an attack and damage has occurred. You don't necessarily want to be reactive. You want to be more predictive before an attack occurs, before damage occurs. How can you identify likely attacks and associated risks? And that's where threat modeling comes in, is to try to do that predictive analysis on the system. We will note that 3GPP does have a security assurance specification that does look at threats in critical assets in 3GPP network product classes, and also does define a generic set of threats for security assurance verification. And they use what's known as STRIDE analysis: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. If we go to the next slide, so one of the main questions is, how can this working group address 6G and security and privacy risks and the 6G threat landscape? For 6G, we want to look at a comprehensive and multiple faceted threat modeling approach. It would be ideal to address the complex and evolving security requirements for these next generation mobile networks. However, when we look back, CSRIC did address a similar question about 5G threats and mitigations. But at that point, 5G security was already well defined and developed, and CSRIC recommendations focused on what optional security capabilities that were defined in the standards should be implemented as a best practice. So that leaves us with a kind of chicken and egg challenge here. 6G security standards aren't going to be at that stage for several years. We're just in the early stages of developing 6G standards in general. We don't have a full grasp on what the architecture is going to look like, although we have some hints on the direction 3GPP might be going. So threat models that are dependent upon a system architecture or data flows, we don't have those yet. We don't really have the system architecture or data flows. So, but that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. The working group should focus on the set of 6G services and use one or more of the threat modeling methods which aren't dependent upon system architectures or data flows. And those could be, some of the techniques listed there. We can select the same set of 6G services and develop negative use cases as input to future 6G threat modeling. Again, since we don't really have a 6G architecture defined in 3GPP yet, rather than focus on an architecture, we would cover emerging security directions that are expected to be reaching widespread deployment during the 6G timeframe. And these would include such common, things we've heard before, like zero trust and quantum safe cryptography. We can look at those aspects and make sure that they're designed into 6G from the start, and perhaps not. Some were not included in 5G or made optional in 5G that were bolted on later. Also, we can focus on negative use case development and threat modeling process as recommendations for improving 6G security development. So all in all, there may be other techniques that we can look at as well. So even though we don't have the 6G architecture, we don't have 6G security standards defined, there is a lot of work we can do from a threat modeling standpoint to look at what is anticipated to come from 6G, what services will be available in 6G, and some of the emerging security directions that we need to focus on. So let's go to the next slide, please. So let me switch gears a bit and talk about integrated sensing and communication. What is that? Well, basically, sensing is gathering a mapping of the environment, determining location, speed, direction of passive non-connected objects. Integrated sensing is being able to have it as an integrated part of the communication network. And ISAC, which is known as, is a potential feature to develop as an add-on for 5G or as part of 6G. And some of the things you can do with this are monitoring UAV activities. For example, tracking hostile drones around restricted zones such as airports, or sensing for UAVs. ISAC can enable UAVs to operate in all conditions by augmenting onboard sensors with network-based sensing capabilities. In other words, provide more safer skies using ISAC capabilities combined with the onboard sensors within the drone itself. It could also, its integrated positioning and sensing could also be used in smart factories, and this could be used to increase the visibility by sensing all objects on a factory floor or in a warehouse. And again, this could be used for things like autonomous mobile robot collision avoidance, and also potentially eliminating the need for security cages. It can also complement sensors for onboard vehicles, for smart vehicles that can increase safety for transportation and automotive sectors. Again, transition to automated systems working as co-pilots or autopilots does require accurate information in the surrounding environment, and that's what ISAC is intended to do, is to provide that information about your surroundings. Next slide, please. So when we are introducing ISAC into the 3GPP network, we certainly want to build a secure sensing system. We want to make sure security is embedded in there. And with that, we were presented that there are 4 layers in a security framework for ISAP. One is looking at the trustworthy network platform, which is the bedrock of the secure sensing system. The next is the operational process, including supply chain integrity, compliance, and transparency. The next is security mechanisms, looking at the technical security measures for ISAC-specific requirements. And then finally, the applications, applying sensing in use cases with matching security. We want to ensure that the network is designed to support security, privacy, reliability, availability, and robustness for ISAC applications. And that secure foundation for end-to-end reliability, resilience against threats, and adherence to privacy by design principles is essential. We do also want to implement strong supply chain controls so we can prevent vulnerabilities, as well as enforce access controls and authorization mechanisms. Bottom line is that these new features that are such as ISAC may add new needs, threats, solutions, and considerations that we have to account for as we move into the 6G system. Next slide, please. The next presentation we had was on 6G security and understanding that a new approach is needed. And this new approach is called security first approach. It will complement the existing focus on improvements in speeds, latency coverage, and on other connectivity elements that we saw in the diagrams earlier. And it's adopting a zero trust framework from the very beginning. Both in the service requirements as well as in the reference architecture. And zero trust approach in 6G should look at all layers, the applications, signaling, data management, personalized security, and segmentation, as well as all exposed locations and interfaces, including roaming interfaces, the radio access network, the Open RAN, as well as any APIs that are exposed from the network. And also take into account all attack vectors, the threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks that might be available to potential fraudulent users, as well as malware and ransomware considerations. And then finally, all stages of the development lifecycle, whether it look at DevOps, continuous innovation, continuous disruption, or runtime. But the whole goal is to have continuous security, visibility, and monitoring, and least privilege enforcement with 6G user ID and 6G equipment. Next slide, please. The next area we looked at was post-quantum cryptography, and I'm sure most on the CSRIC have heard of this and the potential risks that are coming about as a result of it. The threat is cryptographic relevant quantum computers can break widely used symmetric cryptography, or what's known as public key cryptography. Symmetric crypto or secret key cryptography solutions are still considered safe from cryptographic relevant quantum computers, however. Asymmetric cryptography is used extensively in mobile network infrastructure and devices today, which is where the challenge comes in. And it's currently used in 5G, but it's also expected to be leveraged as well in 6G. So what the goal is to secure against both quantum as well as classic computers and deployable without drastic changes to existing communication protocols and network. Next slide, please. So some of the threats that we envision within, if we could switch to the next slide, please. I think we're on the, yeah, there we go. Some of the threats we see from quantum security, one is known as harvest now, decrypt later. This is where attackers would capture the data that's encrypted today and just store it till they have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer available. And at that point, they can decrypt the data that they've stored over time. And it's a significant threat for long-term confidential data. The second is quantum decryption, where they can do decryption of intercept and where they intercept and decrypt communications and gain access to sensitive information without detection. There are quantum impersonation attacks that adversaries would use quantum capabilities to exploit public key cryptographic systems, which would allow impersonation of illegitimate users, enable unauthorized actions like signing documents, or disrupt those communications. There's a quantum man-in-the-middle, which is similar to classic man-in-the-middle attacks, but with quantum, the attackers can tamper with or alter messages between two parties. And then finally, side channel attacks, where you exploit indirect information, such as the timing in the network, power consumption, or electromagnetic emissions within the network. This is a threat both to classical as well as post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. Next slide, please. So when we look specifically at mobile systems, as I mentioned, there are many security protocols that are vulnerable within a 3GPP mobile network. I'm not going to highlight each one of those individually, but as you can see on the top figure on the right-hand side, if we look at a 5G standalone architecture as defined by 3GPP and the various security interfaces between those elements, you'll see that there are a number of security protocols that use asymmetric algorithms that would be vulnerable. Also, identities and the privacy for identities are also broken. The good news, there is standards work. We do understand that this threat exists, and there is standards work in progress that are addressing the quantum computer threat. NIST has a standardization program, as well as the IETF is making strong progress in adopting the NIST post-quantum standards. 3GPP is also expected to undertake studies on post-quantum in 6G Release 20 and also define normative specifications in 6G Release 21. The ORAN Alliance also plans on looking at a crypto inventory, and a study is ongoing there. ADIS has prepared a report on preparing 5G for the quantum era. And they did an analysis on the 3GPP architecture and the transition to quantum-resistant cryptography. And 5G America has also published a paper on post-quantum computing security. And finally, the GSMA is also has a post-quantum telco network task force and developed a network impact assessment white paper as well. So the good news in all this is the industry is well aware of it, and there is a number of activities that are occurring, starting with the NIST standards, as we see in the figure, the IETF, and finally into 3GPP, ORAN, and other SDOs. So let me go to my final slide in the presentation. So where we're headed, we're continuing with our virtual meetings. We have additional subject matter expert presentations on specific topics or research areas that we'll be scheduling. We do have our workspace set up for document management and collaboration, and I'd like to thank Greg Schumacher for stepping up as document editor for us, and we also now have a SharePoint site for document management. Our deliverable, again, is a report on potential security and reliability risks in 6G and the recommendations for mitigation. I think we're on track for delivery December of this year, and we'll just continue working with the group and asking the group for continued collaboration and discussions and bringing their expertise. So with that, that concludes my report. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me turn to the room and the bridge and teams to see if any of the CSRIC members have questions.
Thanks, Billy Bob. Thanks, Brian. Obviously, a great presentation. I want to just call out Brian and the team. They've done absolutely phenomenal work, and I think that this presentation really, really screams very loudly on the kind of work that Brian's leading. So he's a multiple CSRIC member, no surprises there. Just a couple of things. I'm the least technical in all of the entire group, and certainly very far away from Brian and his capabilities. But I wanted to echo a couple of things that he pointed out. They're all obvious, but he covered a lot of ground. So being captain of obvious here, in the past we looked at vulnerabilities and we looked at the threat vectors associated with something that existed. It's very different here moving forward with 6G because we're doing this in advance of the spec being baked in, and quite frankly, we're looking at it in advance of realistically 5 to more likely 7 years to commercialization. Brian pointed out the dates and the times for the different standards bodies to have the different releases and 21 baked in. And so we have timelines for that. But the most important thing I wanted to point out is, one, in the past, we looked backwards. Now we're taking with 6G as security first, and he went through really good detail in that. But there was a lot of things on the slide, and I just want to just point out, again, this is an all-attack vector approach to looking at my third point, commercialization. We're really looking at, and big difference between, not that use cases or applications were excluded in the past. It's just a little bit different that we're looking at use cases and applications and functionality that 6G promises, and looking at the threat vectors and the all-attack vectors associated with that. The last piece I wanted to end with was Brian did a great job, and he pointed out a lot of the things associated with quantum. It's a bugger. It's not easy, and this team is wrestling with it. They're comfortable with it to the extent that anybody could be comfortable with it. And I just wanted to point out that while he had slides, we have slides on it, it is a really, really, really significant issue, and it is one that is paramount in this, and this ability to sort of do a time machine approach to where you're collecting information today with today's vulnerabilities, knowing that you can't decipher it, but in the future you can go ahead and open it up and look back, really adds a level of complexity that this task force, this working group, is working on. So, number one, Brian, awesome. Number two, great work. Number three, quantum is a bugger. That's the George Woodward comments. Thank you.
Well, thanks, George. Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and kudos go to the team. I mean, it's a team effort. So, but appreciate your comments.
All right. My only comment to that is I want to say thank you all to addressing that as well. There are just a number of opportunities. Some of, as you were talking through, considerations that you all have talked about were racing through my mind from the Homeland Security perspective, and the things that we're talking about related to cybersecurity. Just super interesting. I definitely want to continue to follow along as the working group makes headway. But there is a number of challenges that you all are starting to tackle, and I think that what the group is doing is foundational to trying to set us in a good posture for the next decade. All right, I see no further questions. With that, I will turn back over to our DFO for wrap-up. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy Bob. Thank you to all the presenters today for all the work that everyone on the working groups is doing. It's gratifying to hear how well the group dynamics are working, how the expertise is well done, and that progress is continually being made. And sometimes it's a bit of a learning curve on getting the right people on the right tasks or the right organization, but it really sounds like you all are fine in that regard, at least at this stage, where we're 3 months out from the first report, which will be presented at the June meeting. And the June meeting is scheduled for the 12th here in the Commission meeting room at 1 o'clock per usual Eastern Standard Time. We'll be receiving 2 presentations of reports that will be voted at that meeting. One will be one of 3 from the AI ML group, and the other will be one of 2 from the 911 group. So we will need to have quorum, and I encourage people to come in person. I think it will be a particularly interesting and dynamic meeting with some folks who will be here, who everyone will be interested in hearing from. I strongly encourage folks to try and come to the June 12th meeting in person. If not, please attend remotely. And we look forward to seeing you all again in June. I will see most of you well before that. Thank you so much again. And with that, I formally close the 4th meeting of CSRIC 9. Thank you.